Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage our panelists for What You Need to Know About Behavioral Data and Its Impact on the Industry.
Hey, well, welcome everybody. Good to see you all. Behavioral data is a real interesting topic that I'm very excited about. I think it's a topic with a bright future in our industry. I think it's had a bright historic future. Doesn't make any sense. It's had a bright past, shall we say, but it's got an even bigger future. So we managed to find some experts to talk about this topic. I've sort of dabbled in it much of my life, but I consider myself more of a survey researcher, but we'll get to all that in a minute. I'm going to give a presentation to give you just a few slides, give you a little background on behavioral data, and then we'll get into a discussion. But first, let me introduce, well, first of all, myself. My name is Frank Kelly from Ipsos. I do, panel platforms and that sort of stuff. And I'm joined here by Alistair.
Yeah, I'm Alistair. I'm the co-founder. Whoa. Okay. Co-founder of On-Device Research. We do brand uplift surveys and help our clients measure the effectiveness of digital advertising and use programmatic surveys to kind of engage our panels of users. We're about 50 people around Europe, Middle East, and Africa.
Hey guys, my name is Anton, leading the data and insights business at Drop. Drop is a fintech company, venture-backed, so we're focused on transactional data as well as surveys, working across a whole bunch of different spaces, fintech, CPG, QSR, you can name it.
Okay, great. Well, we'll come back to them in a little bit. Now if we could cue up the slides. I wanted to talk a bit about the background of behavioral data. I think it's important to look back a little bit so that you can understand where I think we're going. Again, back, I spent 13 years at Nielsen, the last 6 of which I was in charge of their home scan business, which is a purchase panel data, which is behavioral data of a sort, longitudinal purchase data. And during those days, we spent a lot of time. At the time, I considered myself a behavioral researcher, essentially, and I just kind of, I thought it was pretty dynamic. About 25 years ago, we decided to overlay a little bit of survey stuff, with these little closed-in barcoded surveys we'd mail out to people that were scanning their products. And the client response was amazing. Wow, people really do want to put some other survey stuff on top of the behavioral data, the purchase data. And so we decided, well, that's really interesting. We should, it developed into a pretty good business. And similarly, we at the time we were trying to do single source data. Was a big thing 20 years ago, where you took the purchase data and you overlaid on top of it single people meters, so you caught their media consumption habits. And really, I knew there was something there. I spent 5 years banging my head against the wall trying to make that work commercially, with moderate success, shall we say. But it was just so hard working with that behavioral data. That purchase data was relatively small compared to this media consumption data. All of a sudden, we're having quarter-minute measurements, which is hundreds of times bigger than the purchase data. We had to figure out, where do we store all this stuff? How do we process it? It just posed a whole set of new problems that I wasn't used to. And so those are just a couple of examples, of behavioral research. You could also say trip data, for example. The retailers are really big on understanding people's shopping trips. Internet activity has, of course, been a major source of passive metering for path to purchase. Has been a big area of behavioral research. All kinds of medical data, biometrics, for example, your Fitbit data or other patient data is becoming increasing interest. Financial data, I've worked with companies that track the mortgage and credit card data and so forth. And there's a lot of, and Anton's going to talk about some of that capabilities a little bit later. Obviously, trip data was really, geographic data with trigger surveys and so forth was a big area, has been a big area, and I think it's still a growth area. And mobile device forensics is, I think Lee mentioned it yesterday, a great potential for fraud prevention. And Alistair's going to talk a little bit more about that in a little bit as well, some of the ways that he's been using it in his company to improve the quality of his research. So really what we've been talking about a lot yesterday and even this morning is, ask less, right? But the thing is, it's not like ask less of the profile data you already have. The real issue is just ask less in general, because you might already have that data from some kind of behavioral source. So for example, some of the data that Anton's company is collecting on a large scale could easily be on brand purchasing, could easily be overlaid with your panel data, with your survey panel. And so you don't have to ask what brands they purchased, because you know. These are capabilities that are out there. So that should be our mantra. It's not, yes, we do have to fix our profiling data so we use it properly, but realistically, we have to use all the other data sources out there that can help us know more about a research subject than we do today, without having to ask them those questions. And of course, that raises all kinds of issues with first, second, and third-party data that you have to learn how to manage and collect. I think first-party data, you're starting to realize, the value. Many of the survey companies are starting to realize the value and starting to sell, some of the data that they're capturing in the background that historically was just there for profiling or whatever, but there's now starting to be a market for that data if they curate it properly. So there's a lot that can be done with that. But consent management we're starting to get into some of the technologies that are required here. Consent management is a really headache of an issue if you've had to deal with it. It used to be you just have a little checkbox on your survey or on your website when you join. Okay, yeah, I consent to whatever. It's terms and conditions. But now you have categories of cookies and other types of data that you're collecting that have to be broken out separately. You have to be able to withdraw your consent at any point in time, and that's not easy to do. I mean, so a lot of companies are actually outsourcing this consent management to a consent management company, like a LiveRamp offers a product for that, for example. You need to be in the identity resolution game. People have many online identities. You have to be able to connect up their WhatsApp and their mobile phone number and their email address and their physical address, and all of the various devices that they use have to be all tied back to that person. And so typically companies, you need to have a technology partner to provide that for you. My least favorite word in the world is DMPs, data management platforms. Very expensive process. You have to, typically subscribe. You're not going to get into this game for less than $500,000, and so you got to figure out a way to use this technology to its fullest if you're going to really subscribe to get into matching data and working with data. And typically you need 2 or 3 different, if not 3 or 4 different DMPs in order to really meet the needs of the different publishers out there. You're going to need a clean room for matching the data and bringing the different data types together. You're going to need a data lake in order to do the analytics on it. So there's a lot of technology involved when you make the jump from pure survey research into survey plus behavioral. The problem I've always had in trying to push my company in this direction has always been, we make money on every ad hoc project we ever sell, but in this case, you're putting maybe millions of dollars up front in fixed costs before you really sell that first project. So there's a lot of fixed costs to get you to where you need to be. I reached out to my client service people, hence the fancy graphic, and asked them, what are their clients thinking about behavioral data? What are they hearing? And they're saying that clients want more than surveys. They want multi-source. They want data coming from a variety of sources so that they can understand that the different sources corroborate each other, et cetera. They want the research to be connected. They want to be able to connect to a broader audience of people out there, populations, both online and offline, and different ways to reach them. They want to have some control over the process. A lot of companies, a lot of our clients have invested in CDNs, company data network, in the last few years, and they're taking an active role in managing their behavioral data, their own behavioral data, other third-party data they're buying. They want their research data pumped into those CDNs, et cetera. And in some cases, they're doing their own activation, and we have to deal with the privacy processes of pushing the data to them and let them be the data controller. So there's a lot of data privacy aspects to how you handle these things. And they want the data always on. I think this is a fundamental shift to the way that we think about our research in that, we've been doing a lot of ad hoc. I mean, sure, we have trackers that go on, but a lot of us have been used to sort of a project has a beginning and an end. But this is more of an approach I think we're gonna be in 5 years, where when we do all the plumbing and we have the data streaming into us on an ongoing, continuous basis, and then based on what's coming out of that behavioral data, we say, hey, we should ask a few questions about this or a few questions about that. So it's moving to sort of from ad hoc to continuous research, which is, I think, is going to be the next buzzword. So what are some of the use cases? We've mentioned audience and campaign measurement. I think there's a role for researchers to play in ensuring that the several clients have certainly come to us and said, hey, can you help us make sure that we're getting the audience that we think we're getting when we deal with all these media activation companies and tech companies? Because, so they want us to validate, essentially, what they're paying for. Typo there, but brand lift is a big area. People want to understand that their media campaigns are delivering on the promise. And of course, these areas have both been hugely complicated in the last few years by the moving from cookies to cookieless tracking and so forth. And that's a whole other half-day discussion. Enrich segmentation. So yeah, I mean, attitudinal segmentation is certainly important, but if you can overlay some behavioral data on top of it, I think it adds a little bit more veracity to the process. I think Alistair will talk, or Anton maybe, about product and service forecasting. Just a couple of points on that. That there's different ways that you can use this data to help us better understand what's going to happen in the future. And healthcare journeys and segmentation is, like I said, a lot of privacy issues around the healthcare stuff, but there's a lot of promise there as well for better understanding the needs of the different patients. So what do you need to do then? From my experience, at least in the big companies, that are spread out around the world, and you get these odd questions coming out of this part of the world or that part of the world. You really need a central team. You need to get the experts. You can't have somebody in Latin America that kind of knows a little bit about it, and somebody else in Asia Pacific that knows a little bit about it. You need a central team that knows how to answer all the questions, that knows the process. I don't know how many data partnerships I've worked on, quite a few, believe it or not. And sometimes you go through this lengthy legal process to get all the right permissions and to get access to the data. And then when you finally get the data, you find out, well, it's got all these holes in it. But what you got to remember is a lot of behavioral data is not research data. The two don't equate necessarily, because a lot of behavioral data is collected in various ways. It has holes in it. It could be from a particular, if it's telecom data, it could be from a specific provider, not from a census of providers, whatever it might be. So often you have to understand that you're dealing with something that's really better used for helping you make something more efficient, as opposed to something that's going to help you explain, behavior. So it's important to test out. It's important to test out the research, the data that you're going to buy before you go into an in-depth partnership, because often you'll find that it's not exactly what you need. There's a more than subtle differentiation you need in the way you position your product. If you're going to be a data-driven company, you're going to start talking to a different group of people at the clients. You need to talk to the chief digital officers, and just a new role, but many companies have them. Those need to be part of your talking points. You need to be talking about yourself as a data-driven company and not as purely an insights-driven company. There's, again, a difference there. Yeah, the technology infrastructure I've sort of mentioned. What I found is I need digital marketing people, which is, again, we've never had marketing word, in the research companies so much, but they're the ones that really understand the digital ecosystem out there in the MarTech world. Data scientists, very hot job right now. If your kids are going to college, tell them to become a data scientist, because I think that's going to be a good place to be in the next some years. Yeah, another thing is, can your salespeople that have been selling survey research and whatever, can they all of a sudden pivot and start, selling these integrated behavioral and attitudinal research projects? And the answer is, in some cases, yes, but you got to make it easy for them. it's really tricky. So if you create a data catalog of vetted suppliers, you standardize that sales process. Say, here's the steps involved. You create all the materials for them, and you have to productize it. You have to productize the offering in a way that you don't with your classic research, because as researchers, we love to customize everything, right? You start trying to customize the hell out of the behavioral side, you're going to tie yourself in knots, because there's just there's infinite. It's just going to slow down the process. It's going to take you a month to get a proposal out, et cetera. But if you standardize it, that'll help. Okay, so I've touched on quite a few things there, but hopefully get you thinking about behavioral data a little bit. Now we'll talk to some of the experts on it. And why don't we start with you, Alistair? I found very interesting the work you've been doing on the forensics side of things. That's what I call it. Maybe you call it something different.
Yeah. So there's lots of uses of behavioral data, but probably for this room, one of the things which is quite interesting about how we use it is in our fraud protection system. So we collect a whole bunch of different behavioral data. So we understand people's movements in terms of the location data, which we use for out-of-home advertising measurements. We understand a lot of biometric data about how people are using the phone. So if they're moving the phone like this, how they're pressing buttons on it. And all these things are incredibly interesting for making sure that the survey data and the respondents that we get are of good quality. So to give you an example of this, if somebody doesn't turn on location sharing, it turns out they're 15% more likely to have a negative reconciliation. If somebody is not exposed to an ad, yet we're measuring hundreds of ad campaigns all the time, then there's something up with that guy. If somebody, it turns out, is pressing buttons on a phone like this rather than like that, then you know something's a bit odd about that person. Now, I thought we were really smart about the biometric data, but I was speaking to somebody last night who was saying that what the bad guys do now is they put phones onto sticks and they move them around like this. So that's kind of scuppered that one. But it's amazing that when you put all of these various different behavioral data together and use them as different signals in a fraud scoring system, what actually happens is that you can predict with like a fairly decent amount of accuracy whether somebody is likely to be a bad guy or not when they come into the app and they start just using our survey app. And so yeah, using behavioral data has enabled us to reduce fraud by about 40%. Which you can't really do with like fingerprinting solutions and that sort of thing. The behavioral data is actually quite predictive of what somebody's going to do, whereas the fingerprinting stuff sort of tells you if someone's done something bad.
Right, great, interesting. And Anton, can you tell us a little bit about the way that your company is obviously using a lot of behavioral data, since that's more or less what your company does, right?
Yeah, totally. So first of all, somebody mentioned that in a year from now, in this audience, you'll have a whole bunch of new companies that will be talking about data and surveys. I think we're one of those companies, so we're working today with many of you today, but we're also going to challenge some of the current methodologies you guys deploying. And so Drop is a bit different in a way that we have a B2C app, so you can get it from an app store. We have about 4 million members today. And you can get an app, you can find various shopping deals, you can play games to get the points, you can do survey to get some money as well. You can invest into crypto. And so most of the people, they're very excited to download an app because they can connect their bank account. And once they do that, we have visibility to all of the transactions that the people have. So you don't have to buy something through the Drop app. Think about it as your bank statement. So effectively, we created a large transactional panel that covers purchases across all of the categories. We know if you're subscribing to Tinder. We know if you're buying something at Kroger. So it's an array of different categories. And we don't think about data and surveys as a separate product. For us, it's just one product. So there are many use cases. Think about Uber, for example. And you can understand how you're performing relative to DoorDash. Are you winning or losing in any given week? And then if you see that your share is sliding, we can actually take a group of people who switched to DoorDash in the last couple months, and we can ask them what happened. Why did you guys switch? So for us, it's a joint product, and there's a number of use cases both with CPG, QSR, kind of traditional legacy industries, as well as fintechs and hedge funds, where we're seeing a lot of traction.
Yeah, I think, like I said, the first 13 years or so in research when I was at Nielsen, I was like sort of on one side of the fence looking over at the survey people. And then about 18 years ago, I switched over to, spent some years in this side of the last 18 years in this side of the business, in the survey side, and looking back, trying to climb that fence on all these projects to try and get to some of that behavioral data without much success. And so I'm just kind of wondering, so where are we going? I mean, are we going to put some gates in that fence, or are we eventually going to just knock that fence down, and there will be one type of research? It'll be survey and behavioral, and then we won't differentiate to some extent.
I mean, I was at Nielsen, with you for 10 years. You talk to survey people, data people, to different crowd. They have no idea what's happening. So if you sell to a client, it's two different sales processes. Yeah. But right now, clients today, like you mentioned before, are looking for just one data source. They don't care about surveys or data. Give us an insight that can help us to drive the market share. And actually, when we've been hiring the first sales guys to the drop team a couple of years back, it was challenging for us. You either get the survey people who have zero idea about the data, or vice versa. So we focused on the companies that are coming from a tech space. Think about Qualtrics of the world. And we've seen some traction there, but it's still a challenge. But there won't be any walls in the next couple of years, that's for sure.
Yeah, I've always basically worked in behavioral data and combining that with survey data. It's kind of, I've never seen that wall, but I know that it exists, but I've never seen it. But I mean, for me, if you add behavioral data to survey data, you get to be able to have much richer insights. And so there's like a ton of metadata out there which you can combine with whatever the attitudinal data is that you've collected. And when you see the response from a client, because you've been able to, in our example, improve the effectiveness of their advertising, because that's how you can analyze the data, you can see a completely different relationship with the buyer of that research compared to if you basically delivered a standard survey to them. It's yeah. So in that instance, I think.
And just to add to this one, I think when you think about the economics of this business, you can sell survey package to a client 100,000. You can sell data 100,000. But if you combine two data sources together, we're seeing 2x, 4x multiple on what we can charge the clients if you can actually integrate two data sets together.
But in that, just in terms of the economics, and there's been a lot of talk on here about like what a nightmare 45-minute surveys are, and we're going to give people 50p for it. It turns out if you have behavioral data and you have a survey data, instead of that CPI being, I don't know, $1, $2, it's actually $15 or $20, and so you can actually give a respondent like 50p or 50 cents or a dollar for a 4-minute survey, and as a research company, you can make a lot of money from that. And so our belief is one of the ways to fix the respondent experience is to have like much more valuable survey data combined with behavioral data. And that experience is best. We have loads of people on our panel, which is a little bit frustrating in some ways, who only want to do surveys which are kind of from on-device research rather than from the programmatic like ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, that's the Holy Grail, I guess, is finding a range of research activities that a participant would like to take part in, that you can serve them through an app, and everything from in-store shopping or whatever, mystery shopping to qualitative projects to whatever. But that's and the ability to say, okay, yes, I'm willing to let you turn on internet tracking for the next 2 weeks so that we can check what's going on around, I don't know, the World Cup or something. That's where we're heading. Where through the apps. And the mobile device is really the center of, he's a mobile pundit, if you will, device pundit. The mobile apps is where it's all going to be controlled, I think, where you can just access those permissions for quite a wide range of data access rights, both behavioral as well as attitudinal survey work.
I mean, the value proposition to so if you're marketing your app to consumers, if you say to them, and you say it in the right way, we're going to collect this data, but what's going to happen as a result of that is you're going to get these sort of rewards for this amount of effort. And if you give somebody $1 for 4 minutes of their time, turns out that's like about minimum wage, maybe a bit more. And actually, people are kind of comfortable with that because they would prefer to have $1 for 4 minutes of their time rather than just mindlessly scrolling Instagram. And that's a good proposition.
Yeah, and for us as well, I think we're actually paying pretty high amounts. When you think about the survey industry, we're paying $1, sometimes we pay $5, because we don't really care in the sense that we have the data component. That's how we're monetizing it. And we have mostly younger audiences. So average age of drop would be 20, 25, 30 max, 35 maybe. So we're not talking to boomers. And if you want to make sure that these people answer the survey experience, it has to be very, let's call it, palatable for them. So we made sure, like Andrew was talking in the previous panel, we made sure that experience is gamified, it's amicable. If somebody sends me the email today, hey, would you like to take this 30-minute survey for $50? I mean, let's go for a drink better, right? Like, so why would you do that? So we invested a lot of time, about half a year, to make sure that experience is actually very exciting for the younger audiences.
Great. Let's switch topics for a minute now. So at Drop, do you consider yourselves a market research company, or because I know that there's this issue that some people see as an issue, some people don't. Just that you're doing, say, media activation, for example. So that's more marketing service, if you will. Do you see any challenges with that, or is it a natural extension of your positioning from market research to actually activation?
Yeah, I mean, it's a natural conflict, right? Could be a natural conflict between research and activation piece, but Drop actually started as the activation company first. So people would come into us, they would like to acquire new users, so we would run some campaigns for the customers. And then naturally, once we develop the data product, the analytics products, now it really goes hand in hand. So first, we can help you to understand where your customers are going and why they're switching. And then we're working with the same merchants to help them to activate against it. So when many companies say, hey, we're actually able to drive actionable insights, I think every single company would have it somewhere in their tagline on a landing page. Drop is actually the company who can do that, because we can help you to activate it. We'll go on the programmatic channels. We've done some work with CPG companies as well. So we have not really seen a lot of issues thus far, but we're not experts in activation. We actually have partners who specialize in those areas, like live ramps of the world, who take on responsibility how to set it up. We're just applying the data.
So you sell the audience data to them, essentially.
That's right.
Okay. And that gives you that wall between, to some extent.
We're hedging against, some of the issues that could come up in this way.
Yeah, I see. Okay. Another area that has been big has been trigger surveys, which I found, 10 years I've been following this, geofencing and triggering a survey as you're walking into the Walmart or what have you on questions related to that particular retailer. But I've really been surprised it's never really caught on as much as I would have thought it would have. I know that sample sizes have never been quite right there because people don't like to have the geo data on. But do either of you think that this is going to be a big area in the future, that there's potential there still?
Yeah, we do maybe 10 of these a month, something like that. And it's like one of the challenges with it is if you're coming into the dark, you can easily disappoint a client from it, because you think you know how many people are going to go into Walmart, but that may or may not happen.
Yeah.
So we use it for out-of-home advertising. So we know where people are walking, and we understand if they've been past a billboard, and then we survey them afterwards as a brand uplift survey for out-of-home advertising. And it's taken us a while. We've been doing it for maybe 5 years. And we started to understand exactly what the feasibility is. So if somebody says to us, one of our clients says, okay, we think it's going to reach 1 million people, we think it's going to reach 5 million people, we can quickly calculate that, we can understand the size of our panel and work out how many people are actually going to do it. So most people are actually perfectly fine with turning on location data. So I think 75% of our active user base in the UK have location tracking on. They're fine with it. And yeah, our sales team have just done a fantastic job of making sure that they only take on projects where they know that they can deliver on it, and then it works well. But yeah, I think if you go into it initially, it took years, right, to understand how that works.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to hear it's.
Yeah, and for us, trigger surveys definitely happening, but we think about it in a bit different way. So of course we have classical trigger survey approach. DoorDash is one of our biggest clients, for example, and when the COVID hit in New York, I think it was, government announced on Friday, we're going to shut down all the restaurants tomorrow. And so we actually have ability to talk right away in the same minute to all of the DoorDash customers to figure out, hey guys, what are your plans for the weekend? Are you planning to cook at home? You're looking for some promos and things like that? So we can turn around those surveys very quickly. But that's kind of classical approach. What's more exciting for us about trigger surveys is not just to ask the question, but really to complement our transactional data set. So for example, when you think about the hedge funds, the business of the hedge funds, as you know, they have various positions in different companies, right? So they might have position in Uber, DoorDash, and they're looking at transactional data from the angle of, can we learn some insights about my customers or competitive customers before the earning call for my portfolio company would come out in the next couple weeks. And so we use trigger surveys as a way to collect additional data points around, hey, how's the NPS looking? Are you planning to continue to use that surveys? And so we have ongoing polls for those KPIs. So for us, trigger surveys is essentially creating a new database, a new data asset that would complement transactional data. And from that perspective, hedge funds willing to pay a lot of money for that.
Interesting. Yeah. Hedge funds. Who's a client?
I mean,
I like it. Let's see, what else? We haven't really talked much about passive metering. It's sort of been another one of those big ideas 10 years ago, or 15 years ago even, that's kind of petered out and had its ups and downs and still has great potential, but a lot of trouble finding ways to make it work financially. Again, the early versions were tough on the batteries and they didn't work with VPNs, and there were a range of kind of headaches to try and get the data you needed. But almost all those problems have been solved long since. But the real challenge has just been, lots of companies like mine would love to be able to get access to data that's out there, but never been willing to. We've tried a couple of times, put up panels where you try and capture the data on an ongoing basis, and then just come in at a project level for the data you need. Have you guys had much experience with passive metering, and do you find that it's equally challenging? And I know, I say, there are certain clients out there. I know Disco's got a good service for example, with some of the passive metering data that they're able to capture. But
So I try not to show my age too much, but I worked at the first passive metering company called enrich, which was pre-iPhones, which is sort of, a long time ago. And then ran those products at Comscore after that we got acquired. And always the problem was the retention of the panels. Like, it's just a really, really hard game. We've been working on this for quite a while. We've got, I think, about 10,000 people in Southeast Asia under measurement at the moment, using one of these passive panels for a client. And like, it's a hard game, because in effect what you're asking people to do is put spyware on their phone, and like, who wants to do that? And even giving them $5 or whatever it is you're going to give them, it's a big ask. So it turns out in Indonesia you can do that quite successfully, but in the UK or in the US it's a much harder proposition to people. But a lot of it's about explaining the value proposition to people. And if you can explain that successfully, and you can actually really like measure that funnel and understand how that all works, where the drop-offs are, getting people to come back, allowing people to turn it off and turn it on again, if they decide that they don't want to do that for whatever reason, then it's possible. And the data that you can collect is unbelievably powerful, like amazingly powerful.
Yeah, and we don't like spy games either, right? I mean, we have first-party data, direct relationship with consumers. For us, it's all about transparency. When you download Calculator app from an app store and it tracks your usage, I mean, it's not really transparent relationship. We're getting requests actually from many companies in this audience all the time for the panel recruits, passive metering. But for us, it's really short-term revenue opportunity, but we're focusing on the medium term, so we don't really like it. Yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately, so at Ipsos, we're a big company, and we're in a lot of different arms of the industry, including media measurement. And so I've had to work with building some of these panels in places like the UK, where we've done cross media. Once you get into cross media, man, you have to collect everything under the sun, not just passive metering, but also listening to the background noise to hear if commercials are aired, and on it goes. We do find people to do it, but it is very expensive in terms of usually it's face-to-face or calling, to get people to join. And
to join, it might also hurt your relationship with the clients, right? Because we're hearing more and more clients, first of all, asking for first-party data, and then the second question is always about compliance.
yeah,
We spend maybe in the final calls, when the contract is signed, we spend 80% of the time with their compliance team to make sure the data we collect is palatable for them, and passive metering is not what they're looking for, or in the future at least.
yeah. I mean, it's a scary thing for my privacy people too, because you have to really artfully delete certain things from the passive meter data, which, again, the metering companies know how to do that generally, but it's not foolproof, truthfully. All right, so what are some of the other topics we should cover on behavioral data, do you think? Should we open it up for questions, or?
Well, I was going to say one of the trends that we're seeing today, and myself, again, I'm coming from Nielsen. So Nielsen business model, as you guys know, you go to Walmart, you say, hey, we're going to give you $5 million, give us the data from the third-party sources, and then we're going to sell it. So I think in the last couple of years, all the conversations switched towards give us the first-party data. Not just because it's consented, it's first-party, but also people very excited about to talk to consumers. They might not have any questions today, but if they see the trend in the data, they want to follow up with them. So I think more and more companies, like you said, will be driven by the apps, but it's key to have, again, first-party relationship with these people. So that's very important today.
Absolutely, and with more privacy regulations coming in, the ability to use third-party cookies as an example is something which is top of mind in the brand uplift world. Those things are obsolete. So what happens to the companies that basically were using third-party cookies as a methodology for brand lift? That stops. And if they haven't invested in a panel asset, and they haven't invested in that first-party relationship with the consumer, then they're kind of done. And so what we believe is if you continuously have that great relationship with the consumer, okay, privacy regulations will change, but you can adapt with it because you've got the core central thing, which will enable you to ask that consumer to do something slightly different or something like that, depending on how the technology or regulation changes.
Yeah, and I think just to add to this one, when I joined Dropped about 2 years ago, chatted with many of the companies here, the question was, hey guys, are you ready to start ingesting transactional data? And in many cases, the answer was no. We're excited about it. We don't really get it, but it's coming up. So I would say in the last half a year, working with many companies here, all of us are considering now to start ingesting transactional data because economics of the surveys, they're going down. You don't make a lot of money out of that, 10, 20, 30 points. So the only way to differentiate with your offering to the clients is to enhance and update your methodologies with transactional data. The one that comes to mind is brand health, brand equity. Classical study, been on the market for, 60 years. You can do the funnel, right? Awareness, trial, repeat. But then some companies would be deploying transactional data to figure out, hey, people who actually tried McDonald's in the last 30 days, why don't we also see from transactions what other brands they're buying today? What's their share of wallet? And if you do that, and if you go to your client, you're able to charge them not 100K, they'll be willing to pay 200. So I think that's why the industry is shifting, because economics and surveys are going down.
And on that point, we've got a brand tracker for a leading broadcaster in the UK. We tag every single ad that they put out on the internet, and we track their brand ongoing, and it turns out you can get that brand tracking data, but you can split it by a whole variety of different things because you know what ads these people have seen, and you can tell them with certainty that the blue ad is much better than the red ad, or the video ad is much better than the banner ad, and then you can optimize it, and basically what you see over time is actually their advertising just gets dramatically better because you're constantly doing it, which is very different from other brand trackers which we've done, which is the same thing again and again and again, and the action of what you do with it is kind of the different.
More tactical, actionable.
So there's another point though as well, which maybe we haven't discussed yet, which is how on earth do you deal with all this behavioral data? Because it is different, right? So you need to have a different architecture. You can't have the same people that process data for you can't process this data.
Right.
And the same systems that you use to process your survey data is not the same systems that you can use to process location data. So it's been amazing, just innovations in terms of data lakes and the companies that run that, which just enables you to process huge, huge amounts of data, basically in real time, which wasn't really available even a couple of years ago. Yeah, and so there is an investment there for many companies if they want to go into.
Yeah, the one we use is Snowflake. I hope you guys bought the stock at the IPO last year. I mean, that's what they do. Clean rooms, put all the data sets together, PII is removed, everything is done automatically in a couple days. So it's very good. And because of that, we don't really have any issues with fraud. So when you think about the survey design, if you want to talk to McDonald's customers and they say, hey, we actually bought a Big Mac in the last 30 days, we can automatically verify if they actually went to McDonald's and bought it. So we don't have any, we have some fraud issues, but not that many as you guys talked about yesterday and today.
Are you concerned at all that with privacy regulation sort of shutting down certain parts of the behavioral data streams that might be out there? Or is there enough safeguards in place with consent management to enable the continuation of this data collection?
I'm less concerned about privacy regulations because we feel that we do things in the right way. The things which is the biggest and scariest thing is you happen to have these certain people called Google and Apple who just do some shit and suddenly it changes everything. And there's somebody who basically has an enormous amount of influence on the way in which we do things, which you don't know who it is. And it's an anonymous thing which you just can't do anything about. And that's something which you basically just have to realize that there's going to be an announcement at some point in the year, which you kind of have to deal with.
Like change your business plan for the day.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, and just to add to this one, I think the industry is obviously concerned. We're not really concerned because we spent about a year making sure that compliance is out there. And Drop is one of the first company that deployed what we call data dividend model. So literally when people share the data with us, every time we make a sale, whether it's survey or data or together, we give a revenue share back to the users. So it's fully considered. It's literally a dividend. Why drive Uber if you can join Drop and make some passive income? You know?
Wow. How do you explain that to the? How do you explain that to the user? You call it the data dividend?
No, it's more you know.
Yeah.
It's more marketing-driven language, but that's the premise. Because people using Facebook today, Instagram, they already know Instagram and Facebook will be monetizing their data. We're just doing the same. We're just telling explicitly, guys, we're going to make money with you together, and we're going to share some profits. And younger audiences especially very excited about it.
Yeah, amazing. All right. Interesting. Are you going to tokenize what you're doing?
Yeah, why not?
Yeah, I did that.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of noise around the industry a couple of years ago around blockchain and those types of ways of capturing data behind some walls that allow people to share out. Do you see that as a model that has some promise for access to behavioral data?
Can I do it from a different angle?
Sure.
We're not doing this, right? But I'd love to do this. And I'd like to put it out there to the industry. So what we don't talk about a lot here, or hasn't been mentioned so far, is buyer fraud. And buyer fraud, in terms of the programmatic exchanges, is one of just a massive challenge. Like, there are a whole bunch of buyers on the exchanges who are basically, maybe fraud is a strong word, but are doing things to people who have user bases which are maybe not completely correct. If those people had an incentive, in terms of a blockchain incentive, to behave correctly. So what I'm talking about here is people who are arbitraging stuff from one exchange to another exchange to try and make some money from it. Mm-hmm. There's loads of people who do it, right? And people in this room will kind of know about it, but won't talk about it for whatever reason. If there was some sort of trust score associated with people, would people do that? In terms of buyers. I would love to see somebody do that. It would be amazing.
Yeah, well, there's no question that if you have a longitudinal relationship with somebody, that there should be more than enough ways to ensure that they are who they say they are. A lot of the forensic you mentioned, other panel metrics that you can use, et cetera. But yeah, it's more of a concern with sort of more dynamic sourcing, if you will. Mm.
Yeah, and just on the blockchain, so we took an active approach in blockchain. So at Drop today, you can redeem your points in crypto. You can invest in BTC, ETH, Bitcoin, Ethereum. And so for us, blockchain and NFTs specifically in this use case, it's just the next evolution of the loyalty programs, Loyalty 2.0. And especially with the younger audiences, it resonates well. If you talk to a 20-year-old person today, they're very excited to invest into Bitcoin, especially a couple months ago, it was 50,000, but they're not willing to spend their paycheck on that. So what we're doing today is we're saying, hey guys, you have enough reward points at drop. Why don't you allocate some of this into crypto? It's a play money for you, and they're very excited about it. And also NFTs in the future would be a very good way to engage the merchants as well. So we're thinking about a couple different ways how to do that. So we'll be launching something in the next couple months.
Well, and that's one of the topics that we're going to be discussing here a little later today, I think. So it's a very, very relevant topic. Okay, well, that's kind of a wide range of, touched on a lot of points around behavioral. I'd love to have some questions from the audience on there's things you'd like to more elaboration on, perhaps, or.
My company actually has a product where we match survey data on a one-to-one basis with behavioral data with a partner we have called Distillery. They do audience building for clients, and we make most of our money actually through programmatic. And I'm on the research side, and we're using research data. But my client isn't the research person. And that's a big issue because they don't get it. They don't understand this whole world of behavioral and digital marketing and everything. So that's a big challenge. How do you guys see addressing that?
So the vast majority of our clients are not researchers. Most of the people who are buying from us are media planners or marketers or people along those lines. They care about the effectiveness of their advertising. And what we've done is that generally they don't care about the methodology. They care about the result. They care about what's the recommendation to make my ads better. Did my ad work? How do I make it better? And so the product is not like the research methodology. That's something which they trust us to be able to do. We do explain that, like in the first sales process, but when people are using that data, there's not generally any questions about it. So yeah, I don't know what my advice would be to you, but if they are not researchers, they kind of just trust you. If you have trust with them, they trust you to be able to do it incorrectly, and they care about the outcome.
More the research people that aren't happy.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
So I've got to go around them in a way, but if I tell them about it, they vote on it. So it's a weird situation.
I don't know.
So the way we solve for that, so if you talk to our sales team a year ago, when they're doing some kind of email campaign to reach out to new clients, their keyword would be talk to the insights people or research. Right now, if you're dealing especially with the tech-oriented companies like DoorDashes of the world, it's usually people who came almost from engineering background, product background, who understand the value of the data. So the way that we pitch to them and the reason why they work with us, we're not just sharing the methodology. Like Alistair said, it's about the end result. So we're actually able to take transactional data and survey, and we can backtest to show the correlation with our results versus the sales figures that they publicly announce. So if we tell them, hey guys, this is our numbers, this is yours, correlation is 99%, there's no questions about how valid our methodology is. It's all about the end result as well.
Yeah, so at one point, all three of you have mentioned pairing survey data with behavioral data. And there's possibilities that when doing so, you can run into some inconsistencies. So for instance, claim purchase, right? So how do you rectify those differences when presenting that sort of information to the client to provide the client with confidence to move forward with the results?
I mean, I can kick it off. So for us, first of all, data is number one, and survey is complementary. Surveys are great, but it's opinion, like you said, claim data. We've done lots of tests before. If you ask people about any purchases in QSR channel, for example, people will overstate by 30, 40% if you bought Coke or you went to McDonald's in the last month. So we actually adjust some of the survey results based on transactional insights. So for example, because our transactional panel and survey panel is the same, we're actually filtering out people who said they went to McDonald's, but they did not. So in this way, we improve the accuracy.
Awesome.
Using transactional data as a lever to double check.
I think this is one of the powers of behavioral data is that people are very good at being able to state how they feel and that, their attitudes and so on. Actually, they're really poor at understanding their behavior. Like if you're asking questions about, did you do this, did you do that, did you do that, it's often going to be wrong, right? Or it's going to be exaggerated, not because somebody's lying, just because they don't know. And so if you, there's a whole thing about this in terms of ad research, where actually one of the questions you ask is about ad recall. And so if you're asking ad recall as like a proxy for their exposure to advertising, it turns out everybody who recalls ads happens to be customers of that brand. And there's this whole fallacy around this where like ad research used to be, I'll ask you a question, have you seen this ad? Yes, okay. People who've seen that ad, let's ask them questions, are they more likely to buy? Of course they are. Right? It turns out that people who've been to McDonald's recently are more likely to say that they've seen a McDonald's ad even if they have or they haven't. And so the inconsistencies is sort of the power of it. But you have to manage that in terms of how you deliver that to the client.
Yeah, like, I mean, do you remember last time you went to McDonald's? Was it this week or last week? I don't know. Maybe you went last night after the drinks at the bar, but who knows, right? But the reason why we use transactional and survey data together, it's actually allowed us to unlock some of the new industries that never believed in a service before. Hedge funds would be one example. So hedge funds combined probably going to have more data scientists in one company that all of the CPG companies together. So it's an army of people. And so they never trusted survey data before, it's an opinion. But now, because we can actually link people who have transaction and talk to them, all of a sudden for them, it became a very credible source because of that.
Okay, well, it's just a couple of minutes left. Any final thoughts on the future of behavioral data and where we think it's going? Is it going to become an ever bigger part of market research?
Yeah, totally. I mean, don't be afraid of transactional data. People love it. I think we just have to train our sales team and data science team how to think about two data sources together. But outside of various use cases that can come up because of the one joint data source, just keep in mind that the clients, again, will be willing to pay 2x, 3x on those joint product offerings. So that's one of the things why you should consider using transactional data.
Yeah, and I mean, we haven't really talked about it that much, but there is considerable cost in setting this stuff up. And so the data's arguably more powerful. I think it is. But you have to have a considerable amount of investment and time to be able to get there. And so it's hard for smaller companies to do that.
So all the more important to have the right partnerships in place, I guess, to access the data you need.
Yeah, like most of the research companies that we work with today, they actually outsource all the data cleansing, panel joining to us, so they don't have to worry about it because they don't have experience there yet. That makes sense. But don't be scared of behavioral data. It's great, and that's what's going to bring us to the next decade.
Day will come when there's no fence between. I grew up in that world, but it's good to hear that some companies don't think of it that way. It's probably the way to do it in the future. Certainly.
Awesome.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much.